Like to call to order the meeting of the Personnel and Administration Committee for Tuesday, October 1st at 9 a.m. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Vice Chair Combs,
Present.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Hear me?
I
Can
can
we?
Okay, here.
Alderman Aldridge,
Present.
President Green.
Present.
Board present, you have quorum.
Quorum being present, I will entertain an approval of the minutes for Thursday, September 26, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Vice Chair Combs,
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderman Aldridge,
Aye.
President Green.
Aye.
4 aye votes.
By your vote, you sustain the motion on the approval of the minutes. With that, we have no board bills or resolutions, but we do have committee discussion today related to the employee handbook, particularly the employee performance review process. We were sent a number of documents, but I will turn it over to Christine to kind of walk us through her work on the employee handbook.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the committee. I'm not sure if it's helpful for me to share my screen.
I think it would be. So we're all
Okay.
looking at the same thing at the same time.
You go ahead and do that. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the first document that you should have that's on the screen is just the review process, sort of the steps that we were envisioning supervisors would take. This would include Board of Aldermen staff, and then those people who are also supervised by alderpersons. So the first step would be that the employee themselves would do fill out the performance review based on their thoughts on their own performance that year, and then any supervisors would do the same. The personnel committee would take those under consideration, and then that would go to the full board. If there happens to be money in the budget for pay increases or bonuses that year, that would go for a final vote through the personnel committee to the Board of Aldermen. And then those records would stay in file with the process that the clerks already undertake for personnel files. I did have a few questions, but I think I might just, if it's okay, present on everything and come back to those questions so you can see the proposed performance review. So this is the actual form. So then the self-performance for the employees to fill out, another week for supervisors to fill out the performance review, and then goal setting for the next year, making sure that we're highlighting examples of performance that's been done well, and any areas that need attention or improvement, and writing that all out so it's on file.
Christine, could you go back up for a second?
Yep.
Sorry, you're going
Yeah.
scrolling a little fast here.
Sorry.
For number 3.
Yeah.
Um,
I was thinking that should probably be manager.
so this is specifically for like LAs and executive secretaries.
Right.
Okay.
So there's two different, there's one, people who are not supervised directly by an elder person, and then there are some people who might say they might be supervised by both the clerk and an elder person, such as the executive secretaries. So there would be some people that would get reviews from more than one person because they have more than one supervisor.
Okay.
Yep, so then the next step is really after the performance review takes place, just really making sure that there's a plan in place for the next year so that everybody understands what expectations are, sort of what's working well and what needs to be improved upon. And that can also include areas where the supervisor might be, undertaking some additional work to be sure that they're doing everything they can to ensure that their employees are successful. And then this is the actual review. There's one for, you can see this one's for employee self-performance. So there's a scale of 1 to 5. And then there are 17 areas that you can get scored on, from exceptional to unsatisfactory.
So how do we envision this being delivered? Do we have a software or Google Forms or?
We could probably put it into a Google form or just a hard copy. I mean, I guess, in the future, if it becomes available in the budget, I'm sure it's much easier to do performance reviews with a software program. That's just not where we are yet. So I'm sure we have somebody at the board or someone in IT that could help us make sure if we're able to do this in a Google form or a way online, that would probably be easier than the hard copy, but
Okay. And I think let's also be looking into software maybe as we start planning for next fiscal year's budget.
okay. Let me know when you're ready for me to scroll.
Sarah, I see Shane has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So can you scroll up towards the top, please?
Is that good?
I like all the way to the beginning, sorry.
No worries.
So typically, in my experience, like these work assessments are associated with at the beginning of the performance year, there would be a goal planning process. So the employees are aware of what the expectations are going into the assessment process at the end of the year. So I don't know, I thought that like, as we're kind of outlining what this like performance assessment piece is, we should probably indicate in there that there's some sort of like goal planning process. So the goal planning process is usually like tied to their job description and what roles and responsibilities that they're assuming in their role. And then the manager and employee are working together to establish goals for the year or quarter or, 3 months, 2 months, 30 days, whatever. And then, they can be updated throughout the course of the year, but there's some sort of like goal setting happening at the beginning of the performance period. So that way, when it comes time for the assessment, nothing should be a surprise.
I agree with that. I think we're in a bit of a tricky position since we haven't been doing employee performance reviews. And that maybe the personnel committee, we can come up with, obviously everyone should have their job description, and just have this as a starting point with the end of the process being that the goals will be set for next year. Because I do think I agree with you that that needs to be put in place. We're kind of in a chicken and the egg situation right now since we
Okay.
haven't been doing it.
Okay.
Have the questions that were created here, are those tied to job description, or are there any questions that change based upon what your job description is?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that these fit in under any job description that we have at the board. And obviously, if the committee's interested, we can tailor it to individual job descriptions, but I feel like this is kind of a catch-all. That if you look at what goals are for folks in their teams, all of these questions would be able to be answered.
There any other questions from members of the committee?
I'll scroll down a little bit more so I want to make sure.
Only quick question I got, I think, is on 3 and 4 above, not on the checking of the box at the very top. So, or 2 and 3. So you were saying, so for like 2, say I'm assuming supervisor in this role, 2 would be, maybe an executive secretary where the clerk would assess, and then I guess is 3 also then that following week the alderperson would assess the executive secretary as well.
Yeah, that was something that was brought to our attention during this process, that a lot of times the clerk understands to some extent what the employee's doing on a day-to-day basis, but the closer relationship is with the alderperson directly. So being able to have that feedback, they felt was important to the process.
Got it. And then this would also be the week, I guess, that the alder would assess the LAs as well.
Right, the legislative assistants only have one supervisor, and that's the alderperson. So some people only have one report, and other people have 2.
Got it. I was just thinking maybe if it wasn't not like dragged out long, but why not just combine B and C? When the clerk do their assessment and the alder do the assessment of the executive secretary as well as like the LA. Could be some small minor, but was just thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could just combine them and say it takes 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, we're not trying to draw out the process, but we also know that people are busy. And if you have more than one employee to review, it may take longer. But that's up to the committee to decide.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion, like, I would say 2 weeks max, because if you get too long, also, I think people also drop the ball because it's like, oh, I have all this time to get this done.
You mean 2 weeks max for the entire process?
No, for the response to the survey.
Sure, yeah, that's what's indicated here, and I'm happy
Yeah.
to, if it makes more sense, combine B and C and just say
Yeah.
2 weeks.
I think that makes the most sense, and just have them go out at the same time, but
Yeah.
give them 2 weeks to respond.
Because one way or another, the alder person is probably going to assess 2 people if we're also assessing the executive secretary and our LA. So instead of just waiting a week 3, can just have all supervisors and people who are over employees just all do it like in that week 2.
Okay.
And to Alderman Cohn's point, I do see like you said, I know this is the first time doing it, so we haven't probably been able to, we haven't sat down with folks to kind of set the goals, but I do see that goal setting is in D, so that's like moving forward.
Right, and we can definitely provide supervisors and employees with their job descriptions so they can at least have that to use for this first year. It's not like we don't have anything available to us regarding expectations. Do you want me to scroll down so you can see the remainder of the questions?
Yes, please.
Is there, I'm seeing, okay, additional performance competencies for employee with supervisory responsibility. So would the subordinates be evaluating their supervisors in this role?
That's an option. That's not anything that we've presented today, but this would be, say if you're a supervisor, and so your supervisor would be scoring you on how well you're managing your employees. But I'm happy to create something for employees to evaluate managers or supervisors as well.
I mean, I think that would be a good addition. I mean, I know that previous places I've worked have done kind of a 360 evaluation where, you know, in addition to managers evaluating subordinates, subordinates are able to give feedback on managers as well.
Those are usually two separate processes, though. So there's an employee development, employee performance reviews, employee performance management, and then there's manager development. And usually 360 reviews are done around the time of trying to give feedback to managers with respect to how they're, interacting, communicating, setting expectations, etc. So usually during the employee review process, the focus is supposed to be on the employee, on the goals, on, how their performance is going. Because you don't want to confuse the purpose intent of the meeting, which is to discuss the employee's performance, not the manager's employee performance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the committee's interested in doing right now, but I guess there could be a path forward to start employee reviews, and then we have another topic for today is the management and supervisory training, making sure that email gets out to staff. And so it may be more helpful to allow for people to take the time to take those classes if they choose to do so. And then make that a separate process. I do think there's value in employees being able to provide feedback to managers. I also worry a little bit about how that happens, making sure we do it in a really thoughtful way to avoid any sort of retaliatory or problematic behavior.
I mean, is it something that could just be added to the review as that can just be like, I don't know, like a space where the employee can just, I don't know. Let me think about it. Because I don't think it needs to be a separate thing, but I was just thinking like it'd just be something where the employee can say maybe how they feel the managers are doing, their manager or supervisor, and like maybe what more support that they need instead of like a whole review of like the supervisor. But
So typically what happens is when you get through, and I'm trying to open this up on my own computer versus, having Ingracia scroll up and down for us.
I don't mind.
But so usually there is, which of the forms are you looking at? I've pulled up both the performance review form and it's all in the performance review form. So after there's the the Alderman assessment of the employee, then there would be a follow-up step that would allow the employee to provide comments on the assessment. So it's not necessarily a 360 review, but it's a comment section to basically kind of allow them the opportunity to close out with, whatever feedback they have from the review that was provided to them. So, and, that would just be kept with their file, essentially. So if there's something that they thought that they did better, or something that they thought that they could work on improving that wasn't mentioned already through the assessment process, there would be a follow-up, essentially giving them, a few days to add any comments or remarks that they have based off of the assessment that was provided to them. So, and that would be at the end of the form. So before the signature section,
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Maybe could it just be something added to the review? Even I do see E has employee comments. I don't know if we need like a whole week just to get like comments from the employee when you can do that like during that assessment process, like you say, like towards the end of the form or something. Um,
So you want me to add a section for employee comments on the form? I can do that. But that was the goal of E, as you mentioned, Alderman Eldridge.
mhm.
A question about the comments too. When I'm looking at the form on every single one of them, there's a rating and then it says brief explanation. Are folks expected to provide written justification for their score for each one? Or, I mean, that if they have to do that for every single one, that seems like a lot.
Yeah, the intent was just for there to be space provided if any
they-
further explanation was needed, but not that it would be required. So
Okay,
I
I
can
think,
reword it if it's confusing.
yeah, or just, put something up at the top to make it clear that the explanation is not mandatory. It's if you want to.
Okay.
And then what happens with employees that essentially report to, like, those managers that essentially report to all the alders? So I'm thinking like the clerk, our legal counsel. Does
Um,
every alder person provide feedback, or what is the process for that?
Well, people either seem to report directly to the clerk or to the personnel committee, so I would assume that while it might be important to request anyone who's interested in providing feedback for an employee to be able to do so, that the actual people who report to the personnel committee maybe just come before the personnel committee, or you figure out amongst yourselves who will be undertaking that work. It would be-
So
Go ahead.
yeah, I guess so in my mind, usually goal setting and performance assessments are two different processes. So we've got them in the same document. And I think that that's a lot of conversation to have and one moment for someone. So especially if there are gaps or challenges, like, pivoting from that to like, here's what I expect you to do this coming year, I think is a bit of a challenge for some people sometimes. So generally these two processes are kept separate for a reason. So when I was making my comments earlier about like the way this flows, it seems like section E is relative to the goal setting process because it comes after the goal setting process. But I think we should probably like have a separate process for that goal setting for the upcoming calendar year, and then bump up section E to section D so that it's relative to the assessment that just occurred.
I guess Alderman Cone, I'm not looking at it as a like this is what I'm looking at it, I think, a little bit more collaboratively. So instead of like this is what I'm expecting of you for the next year, but rather, okay, we're talking through the performance review, and so given, the feedback that are here, what are some goals that we think we can set together going forward for the next year? So that's why I think like those two conversations do kind of go together, because it's building off of that performance review of, these are the areas of, improvement or whatever that we identified, and so going forward, let's look at how we what goals need to be attached to that for the next year.
All of these processes should be collaborative, Madam President, but at the same time, if someone is having a challenging or difficult conversation with an employee about where they have gaps or opportunities for improvement, it may be difficult for the employee to then engage with their manager on developing goals for the future.
I mean, I second the president. I'm not gonna lie, the way I see it too is if you're going through the assessment, even if you're having I mean, I don't know if you're saying like after the assessment, then take a month and come back and say, okay, now that we went through your hard assessment, like let's now set goals. When I think when you're talking about the assessment, it can go hand in hand of like, okay, we went through it, tough or good, like, but how do we figure out to move forward to be better? Or how can, even with employee comment, like continue to support you be better? I mean, I look at it as being like a one thing. I see them going hand in hand instead of a separate, but that's my opinion.
I'm not saying that they don't go hand in hand. I'm saying that generally they're separated for a reason, which is sometimes, especially if you're trying to work in a collaborative environment, if you are delivering critical feedback, sometimes that puts up walls in the conversation that make it difficult for the other party, whether it's the manager or the employee, to engage in a constructive conversation around goal setting. So if there are issues, though, there do need to be separate, conversations happening around performance management. It's not, these are all interrelated processes. I'm not disputing that, but there's intentionality and conversations that need to happen to ensure that people are getting the appropriate feedback with respect to their performance. They're getting appropriate feedback with respect to their goals. And and the manager is also able to have and frame that conversation in a productive, collaborative manner. And so generally speaking, these processes are separate. So you have a beginning of the performance calendar year goal setting process that's not the manager just top down saying, these are your goals for the year. You do work with the employee on setting those. It's, and then you have a year-end assessment process, and that year-end assessment process is really focused on the employee. Hey, congratulations, you did a wonderful job. Like, thank you for X, Y, and Z. You need to be setting SMART goals and giving specific feedback to employees so that they know what they're doing well and where they have opportunities to improve. But these need to be intentional conversations. They don't just, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is just opening lines of communication and being available, accessible in the moment when you're having them. But, obviously I'll work with the committee on whatever we decide, but I'm just sharing from my perspective. Usually these are separate processes.
I understand. I mean, I think every job does it differently. So, I know where I've worked and I got a review. I've had a review and a goal setting all in the same like time. It wasn't like separate. But I get where you're coming from. I do think they can all happen at the same time. Basically, you're saying different time. I think it can happen at the same time. And I think if we end up seeing some hiccups in it, we can always revisit how do we, this is the first time, how do we like make it better also?
Could we give just like a time frame for it? So if managers are in a situation where they feel like it needs to be two separate conversations, you have a few weeks or a month or whatever to get this done, so that if they think both conversations can happen at the same time, they happen at the same time. But if not, there's that time for to have a separate goal setting conversation from that that evaluation conversation. So there's some flexibility in that.
My
Yeah,
concern,
Oh, sorry.
Alderman. You can go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to note, that was one of the questions that you had outstanding, was the timing of delivery of these things. So one of the conversations that we've had in the past is the way these are currently structured, the manager, whether that's the clerk or the alderperson or whomever, is performing these performance reviews on the anniversary of someone's start date. And, I've brought this up previously that we should be moving to a annual review process that's consistent for all staff members and not, relying upon managers to track when someone has, and generally speaking, those also align with budget cycles as well. So, and budget planning cycles. So, if there is someone who is doing well, and we start our budget planning process in March, we need to have that performance kind of cutoff date around that time period so that we're able to plan accordingly and say, all right, well, if we're giving out merits and we want to do so based off of people's performance, I'm just throwing this out there as a suggestion, but we would generally conclude, that performance assessment cycle before we start our budget planning cycle for salaries and whatnot. So that way, as we have conversations as a committee, we know where people are in terms of their performance, in terms of their compensation, and we can plan accordingly. So my recommendation would be that we go to a consistent annual performance review cycle, date to be determined by this committee, but I think it should be done around the time that we start our budget planning process. So that way,
Yeah, I would say before that.
yeah, I mean, because
So
we get pretty busy
probably,
during that cycle.
yeah, probably I would almost say the fall. Have them, done in the fall each year because we know, Paul Payne we have to give to Paul Payne our budgets in early January. And so if we do this, start it when the board comes back in September, make sure everything's finished out by December, then when we go to Paul Payne, we can kind of say, this is what we're looking at in terms of, increased compensation for employees based upon, performance reviews and things like that. So we really need that information by mid-January.
Then what I would suggest is we start a performance year as the same year as a calendar year. So goal setting would start in January, develop in January. We would do the evaluations November through December, or, Madam President, if you have a, different time frame, but
I would say September because the closer we get to September, the more like early tends to be less on everyone's plates at the beginning of when we come back than when everybody's rushing to get things done before holiday break.
So a performance cycle would be August through September. Is that right?
We don't come back till September, so I would say September and October.
Or I'm sorry, October through September. Yeah.
It might be helpful to hear from, I think the downtime for the board is different than the downtime for the staff. So there could be a situation where staff maybe started that process in August as a possibility, and then the aldermen could do their process in September. I mean, some of it could overlap, obviously, but I do think it would make sense to have it done in time for budget requests in January.
And I think that makes sense. I mean, staff could, theoretically start in July, or, when the board goes on break in mid-July, if they wanted to, and then, alder people, maybe begin their process in September. Because I'm hesitant to do the whole thing over the summer recess because I know it sometimes can be hard to reach older people during
that. And you also don't want to set up a situation where you're giving somebody their review in July, and if there's an opportunity in the budget for a bonus or a raise, that they don't get it until the following July 1st when the next fiscal year starts.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say staff begins in August, and they do August, September. Board members begin the process in September for September and October. So everything should be, wrapped up by the end of October. Does that make sense to other members of the committee?
Makes sense to me.
Mhm.
And I think if it's okay with the committee, maybe for this first year, since it's a little bit wonky with the goal setting situation not having already occurred, that maybe we can just do everything at once for this year and see how it goes. I appreciate Alderman Cohn's comments about having them be separate processes, but this hasn't been done regularly in a while, and I think it's going to require some level of like touching people multiple times to motivate them to get this done. And having them need to follow 2 different times of 2 different processes might just be too much this first year. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with that. I think that we go through this process is kind of like a baseline, and then the goal setting that comes out of the end of this then goes to feed the process for next year in terms of what those goals are and looking back at them. So when we do this process next year, it may be that one of the things that we need to add to it is, a review or whatever of the goals that were created with your, supervisor the year before and progress toward those goals. So while this year is a little bit more generic, once that goal setting happens, it may become like you have the generic set of questions, but then there should probably also be specific kind of questions tailored to what those goals are from the goal setting session. Do we think that's doable, Christine?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I can get something written up for final approval.
Okay. And I think that that will be easier to have, if for next year we're able to get software in place, I think it'll be easier than having to manually put in everybody's goals from the previous year.
Sure.
And I guess that's the other question. So once, obviously this process is completely confidential. Once it does, the clerk then become the entity that kind of holds all of this documentation so that, when managers and employees are looking at those goals going forward, that there is like one person or one place where all of that information is kept.
Well, right now it's the clerk who maintains the personnel files. So I would assume
So
this would be the same, and those are, protected in terms of who's allowed to access those and when.
right, okay.
I think we went through all the questions I had on this. If you're interested, I used Christina's math brain, and she came up with a possible matrix on how to score or how
To go back really quickly though, and I just a question, since LAs are not under the clerk, do it make sense to have, and I'm not trying to make them separate, but a separate spot for the LAs And I could be overthinking it, but
Right now, the clerks maintain personnel files for all of
everybody,
us.
that's
Mhm.
fine. Okay.
Yep, so we've got a matrix, if you're interested in seeing it, that kind of is a sample of a way that we could make sure if we have a pool of money for bonuses or raises, that you can add that amount and sort of mess with the percentages and have it spit out a number for everybody. I can
Would
also,
you be able to open that? I could not, it told me it was password protected when I tried to open it.
see here.
Password protected.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so here's where this amount can change if they're, depending on how much money is available for the year. And then the percentage, exceptional and, wait, hold on. Where are my notes? Sorry. The two highest ratings, exceptional and highly efficient, would be weighted, they would be weighted more heavily, so get a larger percentage of the money. And then proficient would also get a smaller portion of the money, and then inconsistent or unsatisfactory would not be eligible for a raise or bonus. And then that amount gets, depending on how many people you have who qualify, the amounts are here. I would assume if we have software at some point that we would not have to worry about creating our own matrix, but this was just a effort as a scenario of a way we could track it with a formula so that it's consistent for everyone.
Are there other city departments that are doing bonus structures like this?
I can check. I don't know that the civil service folks have something like this.
Well, but even in the patronage offices, whether that's the county office holders or the mayor's office or comptroller's office.
I can check.
The other thing that you run into with these types of pools is oftentimes managers like to rate more favorably in order for their employees to get more money. So sometimes places like institute like bell curves, because obviously like not every, it would be a dream world if we were all like in a situation where everyone was highly performing all the time every day. But are
Yeah, this is not something you all need to decide on today. We
Okay.
were sort of having internal conversations with our team about how it could look, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to look into the bell curve and ask other offices more similar to the BOA if they have anything in place, and report back to the committee on that.
That'd be awesome.
Okay,
Yeah,
I've got that
me too.
down.
I think this will be helpful to have in place before we go into budget as well.
Yep. Let's see here. And then on the grievance, well, hold on, let me make sure. I feel like I've got some next steps to undertake on the performance review. Does anybody have any questions on it before I move on to the next topic?
So just on the bonus conversation, another kind of point of clarification or question, and probably up for discussion with the committee just to get thoughts, but sometimes bonuses are more reserved for people who are not eligible for overtime versus those who are eligible for overtime, because you know, obviously if people are putting in more hours, if you're eligible for overtime, then you're getting time and a half for that. Whereas, you know, folks who are exempt from overtime, aren't. So usually, some of those structures are in place for folks that aren't eligible for overtime to acknowledge the additional work that they're putting in. But I think that that's just another matter for discussion.
Yeah, it's my understanding we don't have any employees that make overtime, and that right now, if they work overtime, they get more time off.
If we work to,
Can
I
I
was gonna say, I heard the clerk, when Alderman Cohen was talking, made like maybe an agreement sound. I was gonna say, if it makes sense to get input from the clerk on this one.
can speak?
Mr. Clerk, did you have feedback?
Well, so we, pardon me. We haven't, this is my first time seeing this document. And so I have several different points. And I don't think you're not planning on trying to make a decision on this today. This is just a review of this document.
Correct.
Okay, so we'll get a chance to see them all and get some other inputs because they have a number of different points in relationship to it. Yet, for example, the Board of Aldermen is not structured where staff gets overtime pay. And it's just straight pay. And so what we try to do to compensate for that is to give them time off. However, in many instances, their level of work does not give them the time to get the time off also. And there's some inherent structural issues with how and it has much to do with the history of the board, with how the staff workflow is and how it works out. And so then looking at this, in some instances, some of these questions do not seem to be really all of that, not viable, but applicable. And then there are other concerns. So we get a chance to see all the documents, we could give you even greater feedback
Okay,
on what we think could be some other suggestions.
Mr. Clerk, we are hoping to, be able to do this process this fall. Would you and Christine be able to meet within the next maybe 2 weeks to
Sure.
provide that feedback, to come back in front of us in 2 weeks with an updated one that hopefully we can approve?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not the only one. I would think that we need to have the assistant clerk in on that as well.
Okay, yeah.
And
that'd be-
possibly, Tracy Billup, manages the secretary. I'm losing my voice here, so pardon me.
That's okay.
So
Yes, I think if we can pull together that team to get that feedback so we can go ahead and get this approved in the next few weeks, that would be wonderful.
yeah, that would also give us time to, there's some areas of concern I know that employees have in relationship to this, so that it gives us a chance to even get their feedback to bring to a meeting to address.
Okay, great.
But we need to see all these documents first.
Sounds good. Is there any other comments?
No, I was just gonna say, if we just make sure that, I know, Gracia, she's been working on this for a while, so I just will hope that whatever comments the clerk could have to help the process or whatnot, we just do that sooner than later, so we don't continue to drag this out, because I know, we've been trying to get this done for a while, and so far I like what is presented. So if we can just clean up whatever needs to be cleaned up or input to be able to move forward, be good. That's all.
Yeah. May I speak on that? Yeah, certainly I understand that. But from my view, some of these questions or the areas that they're trying to evaluate are not realistic in relationship to the workflow and what the staff has to go through to be able to get something done. Because all the people, and I was an alderman, you generally don't have a real feel for the workflow and what a person has to go through, a staff member, depending upon their position, has to go through to get several things done, get the thing done. Or it's an effect when an older person changes something or wants something to get done, its full effect on that workflow. So I think just the chance to view it and to be able to give that input would be very beneficial. and help this to be an even greater useful document.
Mr. Clerk, I'll get an email out to you, Tracy and Sharita today to get something on the calendar.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. And so we'll look at coming back at our meeting in, let's see, on the 17th. We can aim to have this in a place where there's been some, I think, consensus built, and we're ready to do a final approval on our October 17th meeting.
We'll be ready.
Thank you. So do we want to go ahead on to the
Can-
kind of an update on the grievance process?
Madam
Alderman
President, can I just add one additional thing? When we're talking about this from just an employee handbook perspective, can we outline what the policy is and then put some context around it as to like why the dates are what they are and things of that nature? Just so, future alderpersons having these discussions kind of understand what the rationale was for why we're doing what we're doing.
That makes sense.
Got it.
All right, Christine, do you want to give us an update on the grievance complaint process that you've been working on?
Sure. I have probably more questions than information to report back, which I think once I have these questions answered, I'll be able to, work with the clerks to come up with something to present at this October 17th meeting. But some outstanding questions I had were first, what should the path forward be for somebody who has an issue with somebody who's on the personnel committee?
I would think that that alder person would need to recuse themselves or, be recused from that process.
Second that.
And then did you all want something more specific and stringent? I know some complaint processes have like time restrictions on when something can be filed. I think that's helpful, but also problematic if there's some sort of serious situation with trauma, or maybe somebody felt like an issue wasn't a big deal, but then it turned into something bigger. So I think there's a possibility of having a restriction on when the complaint can be filed, but have exceptions. Wanted to discuss with you also how long you wanted to take as a personnel committee to be able to investigate issues. I would assume some things could take as little as a couple of days and some things may take longer. So I was hoping to get some guidance on those two things.
I mean, any thoughts from the committee on that?
I mean, generally there's like a 30-day like it can be any response, it can be, this matter is under review by the personnel committee and we expect it to take, X amount of time to complete. I mean, just depending upon the situation and the available resources to do an investigation, it could take some time. But generally speaking, policies provide that within 30 days, an employee would at least have a response or an update to their complaint that they submitted. So I think kind of the difference between a, response versus answer.
Yeah, I think response could be, an outline of the process, like we're in receipt of your complaint and this is the, the process that we're going to take with the approximate, timeline.
Yep.
And do you have an interest in having somebody turn in a complaint within a certain amount of time, or would you prefer that be more open?
I think that that's actually something we should probably consult with the city councilor's office on. Or our own legal counsel.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I'm not sure if there's a kind of a best practice in that, or
It seems to be a bit all over the place when I look at policies in other places, but I'll talk to Lewis. I think that the city councilor's office has been hesitant to provide us HR advice since we're unclassified. And they seem to be more inclined to want to work under the civil service
okay.
structure when legal opinions in this regard come through. So I'll check on that. That'll help advise what we come back and present. And then the last question I had on it was, I think there's a much easier to figure out path forward for more traditional employees. Obviously, if something really egregious happens with an alderperson, they can't get fired. They get, voted in or out at the ballot. And so what you all felt comfortable with in terms of what should happen to a substantiated complaint against an alderperson. There could obviously be levels, but right now we don't have a written censure process. So just wanted to throw that out there. I know it had come up before on one of these meetings, if that's something that we had interest in creating.
I was about to say, go ahead, Madam President.
I was going to say that I think there does probably need to be a tiered process based upon the, type of complaint, egregiousness of it, or whatever. There could potentially be different remedies. I'm not sure off the top of my head what those remedies are, but I think that's something that we should look into. Alderman Aldridge.
I'm gonna hold off. I'm gonna probably let Alderman Cone go. He's a kind of expert in this. I think one thing I think Director Operations said, it's kind of tricky because it is in behold of the people who elect the alder. Maybe it's something we look on the state level of like how they do censorship, because it does exist, but probably can look at what they got. Because if something happens, I think that, as president, you already have the ability to take people off committees, if that was a punishment or something like that. But I'm not sure of what much we could do here on kind of censorship.
Yeah, I think it's more of just a kind of a process of we, these are the, the things that we found you in violation of, or, whatever. If we were to create a censure process, I think that we need to very narrowly tailor it toward, what kind of actions would constitute going through that process. So I'm thinking of abusive behavior toward staff or coworkers, obviously sexual harassment, and things of that nature. I think would kind of the most egregious would be the things that would get risen up to that process.
Yeah, I think to some extent it would parallel more traditional staff progressive discipline if something happens, but this would be sort of more in line with why somebody would be able to be terminated.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was something that we should spend time working on. So I'll work with the clerks to come up with something a little bit more formalized, like we did with performance review for the 17th. Appreciate all your feedback. If there's no other questions on grievance, I can move on to the next thing.
Can I
Alderman,
just,
if you have a
yeah,
question.
so I mean, if we are talking about something like censure or, I mean, that would be a change to the rules. So that would have to go before the full board for review and approval as well. So I don't know if that's necessarily something that we're going to be able to get done this session, but we would probably need to work on that in order to propose it as a potential rule change for next session. Because it
Agreed.
should be added to our rules, like
Yeah.
the board rules, not a policy document somewhere.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, the last thing I have is the manager training. What we have available to us through the personnel department is the supervisory practice course that all civil service managers are required to participate in. That would be more narrowly tailored towards the Board of Aldermen. And then the city councilor has agreed to do her presentation on ethics and conflict of interest, which I think would cover some of the topics we've discussed previously, making sure that people are utilizing their staff for things that are covered under what makes sense for public tax dollars, and making sure that people are having their staff undertake work that makes sense and not outside of that scope. And so this is what I was tasked to do at one of the last meetings, was draft a separate email to alderpersons who will be encouraged to take the class, managers who will be required, and then a draft email to staff so that they know what's happening. So I'm not sure if people had time to look at that before the meeting, but it's just a draft.
Thank you for putting this together. I'm okay with the verbiage that is in each of these. But I'm open if there's feedback from other members of the committee. Okay, if there's no further feedback, then it's
Sorry, Madam President, I'm just rereading real quick.
all right.
And Gracia, do you mind scrolling down, or is it the same kind of closing?
I'll just scroll down so you can see this is the one to the more traditional managers, and then there's one for the entire staff.
Just on the email to the board, I don't believe that we have orientation in our rules. Is that something that we need to discuss? If we're going to say that it's a mandatory thing, shouldn't it be adopted by our rules, by the body?
Well,
Yeah, I
as
think
of right now, it says strongly recommended for older people, because I think previously our discussion was that we couldn't require it of older people.
Right, but it says like it'll be mandatory part of orientation for new alders going forward. So I think if we're doing that, then for next session, because we won't likely have any new alder persons before the next session,
Right.
unless someone resigns or hopefully doesn't pass away. But so for next session, if we're going to make it a mandatory part of orientation, we should probably have a rule for the board on mandatory orientation,
Okay,
right?
we can work on that as a part of our ongoing update of the rules.
Yeah.
Because it's been sort of an informal process right now. I mean, I think last time all of the new incoming alder people went through orientation, even if it wasn't mandatory.
Right, in
Right,
practice,
just-
it's definitely been happening, but I understand the point of, I'll make a note to add that as a possible rule change. Did
And
everybody have a
Yeah,
chance?
I mean, similarly, if we're talking about censure or, things of that nature, if there's like egregious violations of our rules or our policies, then, I feel like those would probably go hand in hand with one another.
Yeah.
I read the drafted managers as well, and Gracia. I'm good with that, unless other people have questions.
Alderman Aldridge, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, are you okay with proceeding?
Yep, I think like Alderman Cone mentioned, I think we got lucky this last go round as a new alder, but the board hasn't, I heard, historically always done orientation. So just making sure if we're saying for new alders, depending on, thank you, Madam President, and also the clerks and Sharita. I think you guys have really organized that, and then events afterwards for us to meet alders. But that can change depending on, if they're like a new president come in and don't take the opportunity to do that. So that's just be cautious of that. And I think Alderman Cone kind of touched on that. So everything else fine.
Do you want me to take that sentence out for now? It was just something that was mentioned the last time you met, as wanting it to be mandatory, but since it's not a rule that's in place yet.
Yeah,
not-
let's take it out for now and we'll do the rule change at the beginning of the next session.
Okay, sounds good. I think there were am I okay to send that email out today?
Yeah.
I don't know if you all want to make a motion.
All right, let's, it looks like, I think we're all good on this, so let's do a formal motion that,
Pardon, Madam President. And Gracia, you mentioned that there was another email for employees. So we have the alderman one, the manager one, and then an employee one.
Yes, here it is.
Okay.
yeah, I would say strike that
Great.
one line about, orientation moving forward.
Yep. No problem.
With that,
And then
I will. Oh,
just
go
quickly,
ahead, Alderman Aldridge.
did we talk about what the trainings will be, or who will conduct the trainings, or?
Right. So, and Gracia just mentioned that the personnel department would handle the effective supervisory practice training, and then the city councilor's office would handle conflict of interest and ethics.
Okay, I had one also. I missed it. Okay.
Then with that, I will entertain a motion to have Christine send these various emails today to get the manager and supervisor training in process.
I move that we authorize Director Ingracia to that we approve the communications plan proposed by Director Ingracia for aldermen, supervisors, and staff with respect to supervisor training and conflict of interest training provided by the Department of Personnel and the City Councilor's office.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. The last thing I wanted to bring up was it was brought to our staff's attention that by the mayor's office that there's some level of frustration with our staff reaching out to city departments before CSB requests are filed or without filing CSB requests. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I'm happy to figure out a way to communicate that to staff. If it's helpful to the committee or let you decide how you want to handle it or if you want to bring it up.
Maybe.
I'll say this. you know, I've,
Wait, can we get clarity on what staff? Do we know what
Hmm.
staff? Because when you said our staff, is it the president's staff? Is it the Board of Alderman staff as a whole?
He's
Or
specifically legislative assistants were mentioned.
Mm.
Yeah, I would need a little more clarity. So if they are like they putting in tickets and then the tickets like a lot of times sits for months and then like an alder probably
right.
tell them to reach out to the director because we also know that CSB complaints can get closed. And I know as much as Director of Operation Nancy Cross wants us to put them in, I get it, but I think they still working on their own system to like get that fixed. So I'm confused on what they actually are requesting when request sits for months and maybe the alder asks their LA to reach out to the department head because it's been 3 months to get an update.
Or the ticket's been closed out and there's been no action on the ticket.
And I know
Um,
that's been an issue. Like NISs have put in tickets and they're closed out, and they're like, "Wait, it's closed out, nothing's happened." And they put in another ticket and it's closed out. So
I will also add, just for context, when I first got elected, almost every department had a representative that showed up on Friday mornings to talk with alderpersons about any issues that might be going on that uh, may have been closed out of CSB. So instead of getting, 100 emails a week from 28 different alderpersons, they were there and present every Friday to talk with us about the different issues in our neighborhoods. That, hasn't happened for quite a while. It's not just this administration, but that was always very helpful to be able to have representatives from the departments, because then they could also educate us on why they might be having challenges picking up trash or filling potholes or picking up stray dogs, whatever the case might have been. But forestry was down here, parks was down here, streets was down here, health department came regularly, and none of that is available to us any longer.
I'll report that information back. I just wanted to make sure you were aware it was brought to our attention in the president's office.
I mean, maybe what we need to start doing, or ask our LAs to start doing, is when they do email department heads over an issue, to just be clear in that email that this is the CSB number, or this ticket was closed out without remedy, so that there is mention of CSB, because we do know a lot of times things have been put into CSB and there just hasn't been a remedy on it before. And that's why legislative assistants reach out, but maybe just kind of getting more direction to the employees under us about, make sure that you are referencing CSB action, like previous CSB action, when contacting directors, just to make it clear that that is happening.
Can I just add to that, though, Madam President? There are often times in underserved communities that they call, the complaints get closed for one reason or another, whether that's an insurance claim with the city councilor's office, which I've had to deal with because of, refuse trucks, or, any number of forestry trees that are falling on people's cars or houses. Sometimes they save request numbers, sometimes neighbors don't save request numbers. So, having them go back when they're already in a moment of anger, frustration, trying to get any assistance whatsoever to help with this issue. I do my best to try and ask folks, in a kind, calmly manner, whether or not they've put in a request to CSB, but that's not going to stop me from serving my constituents either. We need to make sure that those issues are getting taken care of.
Right. I think I'm thinking of it. So all of our staff has been trained on CityWorks and can look up complaint numbers, even if the person on the phone doesn't know the complaint number. All of our LAs and executive assistants have the ability to be able to say, like, this was, put on these dates, and this was the outcome of it. So it might just be a reminder that, look it up in CSB before emailing a director, because I also know sometimes people will put something in on a Monday and then they call on a Tuesday because it hasn't been fixed. And
And Gracia, your email is up. I don't want you to go to something that.
Oh, thank you.
You can quit your. There you go.
yeah. I mean, we don't have to take action on this right now. It's just, it was something that was brought to us, and know that it continues to be, I think, a frustration on both our end and the administration's end on getting things rectified through CSB. So any other comments on that for the time being? If not, then I think that concludes our discussions today. Is there any announcements? All members are present. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All
Previous
those in
role.
favor signify. No objection to previous roll. We are adjourned.